So good morning from my side as well. So I'm Ville Sointu, I'm the head of emerging technologies. As some of you might have noticed, my previous title was head of DLT and blockchain, which is actually still my responsibility. My boss just decided I did such a good job with it that, let's do some more stuff instead as well. So I'm now the head of emerging technologies for NORDEA. I still run the Center of Excellence in NORDEA for DLT and blockchain, and we are responsible for the strategy, execution, and project portfolio management of all the blockchain activities we have in NORDEA. We also deal with cryptocurrency policies towards our customers and of course internally as well. It's an interesting combination of roles and definitely keeps me busy most of my days. Now, a little bit of background from my side as well. I have 16 years of experience in fintech. Before that, I was working in telecoms for a while, and I've been in blockchain since 2013, so 5 years of crypto time. And, as the tradition is that everybody who works in blockchain space has to give an origin story on, how you actually ended up in this space. And for me, that happened in 2013, like I said, in February, where I was speaking in a Future of Payments conference in Finland. And in one of my last slides, I kind of mentioned, among many other things, I mentioned that cryptocurrencies, and especially Bitcoin, might be a thing that we need to look at as bankers in the future. And never thought twice about it that much, it's just an interesting thing I read about. But then after me, the Central Bank of Finland had a presentation after me, and the person from Central Bank of Finland started her presentation by saying that with regards to the last presentation, cryptocurrencies and bitcoins are all a scam, they are pyramid schemes, and you should never even look at them. So I was absolutely convinced that that's something I absolutely need to look at, and the next day I started looking into remittance scenarios using Bitcoin. The other reason I'm here today is because on that day I did not buy Bitcoin. So unfortunately I'm here doing my job instead of spending time in Bermuda in a nice villa. So that being said, let's move on to NORDEA. So NORDEA Bank, for those of you who don't know, so I mean all of the banks like to always say that we are the largest of this and largest of that. Well, NORDEA Bank is the largest bank in the Nordic countries. We have 11 million customers. We are a top 10 universal bank in Europe, and we have a very strong balance sheet and position. Our profits, I think we did 8 billion profits last year in euros. The title of my presentation is something I actually picked up a little bit last minute. Does anybody recognize the first part of my title of the presentation? No? Nobody watches HBO? Okay. In HBO, there's a series called Westworld. In Westworld, it's a story about artificial intelligence and robots basically being used for entertainment purposes inside this park. Now, this park is a controlled environment. These robots are pre-programmed to do certain things, and whenever they see certain things that they don't understand or that is not in the scope of their understanding, they say that doesn't look like anything to me. This is actually the way us bankers think about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin pretty much these days. It doesn't look like anything to us because it's not regulated. It's not defined in laws and in any way that would allow us to touch it. A lot like with Westworld, people like me inside the banks are trying to break out of this cycle, make sure that we understand what is out there beyond the boundaries of the regulation that we have today, and what can we actually take into our business to start learning from what's going on outside the scope of the traditional way of thinking. Now, the kind of intro to my set was about the journey of NORDEA inside the blockchain space. And for us, I like to kind of look at this through the lens of hype. I heard from a reliable source as well that you cannot have a presentation about blockchain without Gartner hype curve. So here it is. Congratulations. The Gartner hype curve, this is 1 year old, puts blockchain technology in the downturn of hype. Interestingly enough, this was mid-2017, and I'd like to emphasize that the reason why it's going down already mid-2017 is that this represents the enterprise or the bank's perception into blockchain technology, not the cryptocurrency or the kind of ICO space that was blowing up at the time. Because one of the kind of key turning points for banks and blockchain and cryptocurrencies really was in 2015, when I would argue that blockchain was on the top of that hype cycle. 2015, the banks started waking up to this space. Same with NORDEA. We just had a presentation from ABN and AMRO where they said that they started looking into blockchain in 2015. Same is true for NORDEA. 2015 was the year when we had the, I think it was Fortune magazine that had the cover, The Truth Machine, about blockchain. And this kind of truth machine thing triggered a lot of things and investment into this space, including the banks like us, who started investing in consortiums like R3 to have almost like a group therapy club for banks to talk about blockchain, because, you know, so much was going on in the Bitcoin space. So 2015, we started looking into this, so did many other banks. We also saw the start of enterprise blockchain or DLT platforms starting to be developed in 2015. Now, when you look at banking from a timeline perspective, and you start to understand that technology, you know, introduced to the broader public by Bitcoin in 2008, was out there for 7 years before the banks started looking into what actually can we do with this stuff, and started developing their own platforms. Now, this was 3 years ago, a little bit over 3 years ago. 3 years is nothing in time of enterprise software development. Yeah, in fact, it's barely enough to create a stable software to go into production in mission-critical systems like the financial services, of course, all are. So we are going to head further down the curve, and you know, when Gartner releases their new cycle in a couple, I think next month, we will see blockchain towards the bottom of that cycle. And the reason is that there's so much disillusionment happening right now. We have all the recommendations by the central banks saying, you know, it's not ready. We have Bank of Canada saying that, you know, there's problems with the solution. It's not mature enough. We have SWIFT saying that they did a pilot with blockchain, didn't work out that well. All of this is kind of pushing down the hype in the same way as every technology in the world goes through this cycle. And as a testament of that, today, if we define a live production system as a multi-party system where people can do repeatable, unpredictable transactions that are uncurated, nothing is live today, with one exception, which I will talk about in the end of my presentation. So, hype. So what did we do in 2015? Well, we needed a new vocabulary. We needed to separate the way we talk about blockchain and how do we separate from cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And all this text, forget about it. I only want to talk about 3 things, which is that the first base layer is basically crypto assets, Bitcoin. These are the applications running on blockchain platforms. Starting from this, we built the understanding out. So the next layer, of course, is blockchain technology as a general purpose distributed database with a certain way of forming blocks and consensus around it. And you can do more than currencies, you can do more than transactional systems and payments on it. And of course, this is fantastically important, interesting for us banks. But the more we look into this space and into these stacks, we have started to understand the weaknesses of this technology. It's not okay to copy all the data across all the nodes in the network. It's not okay that everybody sees everything in that network. It's not okay that we spend so much energy on mining or proof of work like Bitcoin does. So scalability, privacy, and overall transparency are all problems that we needed to solve. So soon we realized that the best way to solve these problems actually is to extend the scope. We get rid of the blocks. We start to talk about distributed ledger technology, or DLT. That's why my previous title was head of DLT and blockchain, because I'm not allowed to be head of blockchain only because DLT is what we banks want to talk about. Distributed ledger technology is a broader definition of a distributed database with a consensus mechanism and a proof verification mechanisms to verify the uniqueness of transactions. But it does not require the data to be formed into blocks as such, so technically they are not blockchains. For the record, the R3 consortium, which was mentioned earlier, built a DLT platform called NORDEA. And in fact, they made the headlines as well because they came out and said that, well, actually, it's not a blockchain, it's a DLT platform. They got so much bad press about that they kind of walked back those comments a little bit, and now they say that, yeah, they're a blockchain company, even though we all, as engineers, know that they're not really blockchains. So, we have a technology, we have a governance mechanism, and we have a resilient way of doing things. So what does it mean from networking perspective? Network is the key word that we use when we build anything on blockchains. The evolution of networking from centralized to all the way to distributed is repeated every time a new service provider comes on board. Centralized is the easiest way to get anything into production, and that was what we see in the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, but also in many of the banking services in the past. We move towards decentralization, which requires more orchestration, more focus on governance, and this is actually where we want to be as banks, where we actually are in many cases, like with card networks, SWIFT, and so forth. The right-hand side here is the crypto utopia, where everybody wants to be their own bank, and of course this is a bit of a dangerous proposition, and we really don't believe in that as banks, because we think that most people would actually like to have a trusted counterparty to deal with all the complexity, like was mentioned in the previous panel as well. We think about these networks in three different ways. We have different policies for public networks, called permissionless networks, consortium networks, and internal networks. We need a very different way of talking about each of these different categories of networks, but we also start to understand that these actually intersect in many ways. The internal networks can generate trusted data for consortium networks and public networks, maybe in the future. And there's an intersection of consortium networks and public networks called public permission networks, which will, we will see more and more in the future as well. The important thing for us banks, though, is that all of these things have a common thing, or a common theme and consideration that we have. And that's, of course, risk, compliance, governance, and regulation. We need a clear understanding of what is the risk profile, what is the governance profile, what is the counterparty risk for anything we network with as a bank. Because at the heart, we are here to protect and serve our customers, not to entertain the whims of the techno industry. We see the opportunities in this space, but we drive everything through governance and compliance. So what are then the use cases that we're actually looking at? Well, cross-border payments has been around for a long time. I've mentioned it many times, and of course we're looked into that as well. Trade finance is a very hot area for us today. Talk about that more. KYC, digital identity, consent management in terms of PSD2, especially now that the banks are opening up their APIs, we need a good mechanism to control the consent of customers to actually authorize API access across different banks. And DLT actually is an interesting way of handling that. Cash on ledger basically provide a liquidity on the automated networks that we build. And finally, real estate trading. Let's look at the payment part first. So this will be a little bit of a kind of an obvious thing for you bankers, but let's do this anyway. When you send Bitcoin, Ether, any kind of cryptocurrency to each other, you're not transacting with value, you're transacting within a closed ecosystem of that cryptocurrency. Because these cryptocurrencies have no utility in most parts of the world. Some exceptions, but mostly nothing. So that means that you actually cannot spend the cryptocurrency that you're getting, so you actually have to use exchanges. So what you're actually doing is that you're relying on crypto exchange to provide you with the fiat value of that money, of that transaction. So you are dependent on these exchanges and the liquidity of these exchanges. This would be fantastic if there would be enough buy and sell demand and offering on the both sides of this, and it would work if there is liquidity. For us banks, it's a no-go, because in the volumes that we do transactions, there is not enough liquidity out there to actually use cryptocurrencies as a payment bridge in the corridors that we would actually like to support. So what could be then the solution for banks if we can't go to crypto? The other side, of course, being that it's unregulated, so you can't really touch it. Well, let's break it down to two different parts. So two different parts. The messaging part, actually sending the message that I owe you something, great. But then we also have the settlement leg of these transactions. Most of the DLT solutions you hear about today is focused on the messaging part. They do nothing about the settlement part. And the liquidity and settlement of cross-border payments is actually 43%, according to McKinsey, of the cost of a cross-border transaction. So you're really kind of fine-tuning the things more than actually solving problems, unless you touch the actual liquidity part as well. Before I have run out of time, I want to conclude with my favorite project, which is, of course, WeTrade. Was also mentioned in the other previous presentations. WeTrade is solving a clear problem for our customers. Our SME customers are now able to create trade transactions on a digital network across these 9 banks inside Europe. We are offering our existing financing products to a much smaller more volume-intensive and smaller transaction base than before. The most important part about WeTrade is the fact that we are not selling blockchain. We're actually selling a fantastic new product for our customers. And the coolest thing about this, of course, is that last night, we won the Block Award for the most innovative financial services solution using blockchain in the last night's ceremony, and that was, of course, a great honor. We're also happy to say that we are ready for production, and you will hear more about the results of our first customers very soon from the media. So, with that being said, this actually is a live product, the first of its kind in a banking environment using blockchain technology. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ville, and congratulations on the award, well deserved. I'm looking forward to seeing the first customers come on. You're actually live now, customers are onboarding as we speak.
So we will release the details of that very soon, but the network is ready for production, and we are onboarding as we speak.
That's very exciting. We have time for one very quick question, because I'm sure you're all very eager to go and get a cup of coffee and take a break. So anybody have a quick question for Ville?
Hi. Security obviously is a key importance in banking, and many of the crypto exchanges have been hacked, as you know. Have you looked in detail? I'm not talking about within the encryption of the blockchain, but in the interface between the blockchain potentially and the platform, whichever platform you're looking at. Have you looked at the security issues that are involved?
So, to be clear, we are of course not working with crypto exchanges on the open side at all. You know, it's unregulated and therefore out of limits for us. But it's still a very valid question in terms of security. How do we handle the security of customer-facing applications that are using blockchain? In our case, permissioned and kind of our own governance-focused blockchain in the background. And the answer is that we run the same risk analysis, penetration testing, security audits like we do for every internet application we have out there. So the intent, of course, for us is to harden it in a similar way as we do for all our customer-facing applications on the internet.
Have you experienced any specific problems with regard to blockchain in terms of security?
In terms of security, no, not yet. I mean, the kind of customer-facing part of that, the channel part, is very similar to the internet platforms as such, and we are very good at hardening those. At least we think we are. At least our track record is quite good. And when it comes to the blockchain itself, it's inaccessible from the outside. So the only way you could actually corrupt that is that, you know, if you have corrupt employees, and even there we have, of course, protections in place and processes and you know, 4i principles and so forth that protect us from the kind of inside attacks that, of course, are quite common as well in the banking space.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this really is, you know, when you look at the go to production cycle of WeTrade, for example, I mean, it's pretty boring work. it really is, you know, IT, risk, security, compliance, customer service training. The blockchain part, like was mentioned by Rabobank in the previous panel, was that it's actually only a very small part. It really is about agreeing on how do we align these processes with a new product, and it just happens to use blockchain as a communication mechanism for the smart contracts for the trades. So yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, but you know, blockchain work when you go to production is very boring. Sorry to say.
But very worthwhile, because anything boring does tend to be worthwhile. And also, it's especially interesting also to see this is an example of blockchain not just rehashing existing systems, not just making them more efficient, but creating new business models. And we're going to hear more about that after the break. Please reconvene here at 11:40. In the meantime, enjoy a cup of coffee.